So I just got home from a rehearsal with Pamela Makala's band, and this time there was a new player. I'm not sure if she's going to play with us all the time. She's probably pretty busy because she plays for Mannequin. So,
right, with a bunch of other friends.
Yeah, so Zoe Moff plays bass for Mannequin, but she's playing guitar in Pamela's band.
Because you're playing bass.
Because I'm already playing bass.
Yeah.
Good for me. And I'm like, I'll try not to be too intimidated because Zoe rocks. But she added a lot. It was fun. At Pamela's rehearsal, she has this song called Airplane Mode, and the bass line in the verse is pretty cool. It goes like, ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-da-dum, bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. Okay, so it loops like that. Okay, so one thing that Nate pointed out in a lesson many times ago when I was learning a transcribed bass solo was how the chunk of music was made bigger by a tiny variation. So I took that bass line, which that's how it's written and recorded on Pamela's song. And today I went ba-dum bum 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 ba-da-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum 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 ba-da-dum bum 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 bum. And just like it's such a small difference.
A tiny variation.
It's like one note different and a little bit more space because I'm skipping a note. But it ties up that whole thing and makes it a much bigger phrase. And you were saying that you had observed someone who was doing something similar.
We were listening to, try not to make this a Phoenix-centric podcast.
Oh, yeah.
But we were listening to Phoenix Alpha Zulu, and there was a riff that was this very simple pentatonic. I couldn't sing it, but like it's a very just simple pentatonic kind of major pentatonic.
Yeah.
The natural thing that you would do is just repeat that chunk, but they didn't. They did like 3/4 of it, and that last little quarter, they really switched it up rhythmically and threw another note in there, and it just made the riff so much bigger to have that little. I mean, sometimes when you produce records, which by the way, that's just Command P on the Mac. It's a little shortcut key for all you guys.
You guys know about the Command T for talent. Right?
Command T for talent.
Yeah.
It's Command M for mix. Shift Command M masters. Yeah, when you learn all the keys, it's a lot easier than...
You just lost your job.
I did. I just gave away my old job. Anyway, when you produce, that's a lot of times what you're looking for. Is like, okay, that's cool that you're doing... The first iteration of the idea is to just repeat that thing. But hey, what if you threw in this variation? Or vice versa, maybe get rid of a variation if it's just unfocusing the riff, if it needs to be just driving and there's too much variation. But it's just that next level of polish on stuff. It's so funny that ideas so often have a next level. So we played Boot Barn last night. The night before, we were just about to go to bed, and you were like, I should really sing for a minute. And you sang, and I thought you sounded, I could tell you weren't 100%, but I was like, okay, it sounds like 97% to me. You felt it was not nearly that.
Yeah, I felt like I was like 50% as good as normal. It was horrible to my ears.
Right. But then the next day, you were feeling a lot better. You said something in sound check.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
wow.
what I've learned is when I am not singing on a regular basis, especially not gigging on a regular basis, because it's been about a month since I had a vocal gig, is it takes me 3 nights to get my voice back, or 3 days to get my voice back. So I can sing on a practice on a Thursday, practice on a Friday, and then on Saturday my voice will be good. And I did sing quite a long time the night before. So
right.
I just hadn't done the night before the gig, and we were about to go to bed, and I was like,
Yeah.
So I put in 20, 30 minutes, and man, it paid off. I was so much better. So much better at the gig.
Yeah.
I was probably 99%.
Yeah, I thought you were great. We played Boot Barn Hall, and we're always thankful that they have us back, and we draw well.
Pre-sales were about 450.
Yeah, pre-sales, yeah.
And their capacity's 475 seated, so... Or 472, I think.
Yeah, so. You know what's interesting? I meant to ask about ADA seats. So we talked on the podcast before, a GA seat is general admission, which just means that like you just get in and you don't have an assigned seat. ADA seating is the Americans with Disabilities Act. I don't know if those seats just stay open or if they can sell those seats.
At like, that's a good question.
You know, at the door or something. What did you think of the show?
Oh, it was another great one. I mean, we sound like a broken record, but we're still riding pretty high with Boot Barn Hall. That audience is always ready to go. I mean, they open doors at 5 and the show's at 7. So they're sitting there having dinner and drinking and they're warming themselves up before we even go out on stage. My takeaway from that show was what we talked about on the way home, where I think neither the band nor the crowd were quite as high energy out of the gate as we normally are. I mean, there were certainly yells. I mean, the moment the announcer went out on stage, the crowd went wild. I mean, it was still a hot room, but it wasn't as hot at the beginning as normal. And we talked about how we as the band matched the energy of the room well. Right. And this is interesting to talk about because the rule is you, as a musician on stage, you don't wait for the crowd to lift you up. Like, that's never going to happen. You have to lead the way energetically. But on the other hand, you and I both hate it when there's a low crowd and the band's like, come on, everybody, clap your hands, get up and dance. And like, no one gets up and dances because they're not feeling it. It's like being out of sync with someone you're having a conversation with. Right. And I felt like we were in sync with the audience. We did a great job. We were still doing our job and raising the energy, but we weren't raising it so far that they were like, oh, no, we're not there with you.
Fake running around, doing the big, huge moves. It was just like, okay.
Come on, here we go.
And it was some confidence in that, some confidence in knowing you're going to get them. Mm-hmm. You know, we got to the end of the first set, Rhiannon. Yeah. And that was just like ear splitting. And then the second set, everybody was having just a great time. Yeah, it was full on. But I think we did a good job of having that confidence of going like, it's going to happen. Yeah. We don't need to force it to happen. We'll just perform well at this level. Yeah. And we don't have to push.
I guess I would say it's leading the audience rather than pushing the audience is maybe how to summarize that down into what it felt like.
And if you're talking about not necessarily Petty Nicks, but just bands in general, that's something I see where you can actively turn audiences off by pushing way too hard. Right. I mean, that's probably not just true of music, but if you think about a speaker who comes out on stage or a motivational speaker and the audience is kind of at this like, oh, I'm perfectly willing to like sit and listen, and the speaker won't take less than like get on your feet, you know.
Yeah. If the audience isn't warmed up enough for that,
it can go negative. It can make them pull back.
Yeah, at least personally, I know as an audience member, that's true, and I assume that's true for more than just me.
Where they're like, "Come on, guys, come up to the stage! Everybody, come up to this front of the stage!" And it's like, I was fine with what was going on, and now I actively hate you. Like now that you called me out. Like, I hate you. And what I was saying when we walked into Tellers, it's like I saw somebody do it recently and it actually, like, worked. And I was like, oh, my gosh. Yeah. Because in general, never do that. Like, hey, everybody, come on up front. Because people will just pull back on you.
You know, some people will come up, and you and I are a bit cynical with this stuff.
Maybe. I guess point being, even though we weren't in shape, we hadn't done it in a month, and we were talking about what's interesting about that band. We were like off for a month, maybe a little more, to get together and rehearse. It wasn't musically, it was the interaction with the crowd, and I'm sure a bit musically. You know, you're like, I played through everything the week before the show, but like still, it's not second nature. It's kind of become, you're thinking about it. At the same time, what felt rusty was the connection with the crowd. And you just can't get that from... We could have gotten together and rehearsed and run through all the shows, and I think we would have felt as rusty.
Yeah. Because my banter was really different this time because as always, I try to stay present. with myself and with them. As Boot Barn usually is, it was a noisy crowd. It wasn't as much of a listening crowd. And so even though I've told stories there before, I didn't feel like telling any stories this time.
No, it just didn't seem...
I mean, I felt like since we were kind of pulling them along and they weren't like 100% with us, like the energy level was only at 80 instead of 100. I didn't feel like at the beginning, yeah. I didn't feel like I wanted to cash in my cards and tell some touching story about dreams. I made it short and I was like, yeah, this song means a lot to me. I hope you guys sing along, kind of thing.
Yeah, it wasn't gonna land the same way.
No,
but I think the big takeaway was we had the confidence. I am suspicious. I don't know for sure, and there's no way to know for sure. Boot Barn Hall has a ton of security. I saw 4 or 5 people. Maybe more. Mm-hmm. And they were doing a lot of posting up on the sides of the stage. And then several times, especially in the first set, they would walk back and forth across the front of the stage. And I was a little suspicious that was making people feel like they weren't supposed to get up and get closer. Mm-hmm. Just because security especially that first set, they were very present, at the front. Appreciate them doing their jobs and stuff, but it's not invisible security.
That's funny because I didn't notice them at all.
Well, I was looking around. It just wasn't getting started like I was expecting it to, and so I was like looking around a lot, going like, what's happening here? Huh. The band sounds fine. Is anybody being weird? Am I being weird? I was like really paying attention to like what was going on in the room.
Maybe it's just a January thing. Like everybody's been through the holidays
it was just the holidays. It was just the holidays for us. Who knows? Bottom line though, end of the night, it was huge success.
Oh, absolutely.
For everybody that was there, and I know everybody that was there listens to the podcast. So Thank you all very much. We had an amazing time. So, as many musicians know, a guitar player named Jeff Beck died recently, actually before the last podcast. And I think in some ways I was processing it. I did have Wired and Blow by Blow and the Jeff Beck group, and I had maybe 5 or 10 of his records on vinyl when I was high school.
Oh.
And I would say as much as you can be influenced by Jeff Beck, he was a major influence on me. Mm-hmm. And I say as much as you can be because the guy was a player on just a really different level. It would be like asking a car mechanic how much Stephen Hawking's theoretical physics have been an influence on his, you know what I mean? Like, but you're both talking about like mechanical things that like, right? So he probably influenced you a lot, right?
Okay.
I mean, you both use your brains to solve problems, right? So you probably Jeff Beck was just that far ahead of everybody else. I mean, it's just a constant, that's the rice cooker. Point being, Beck was this next level dude. One of the biggest ways he inspired me and influenced me was he was constantly evolving and constantly looking for sounds. And he died at 78. He was one of those guys like the Stones. He was in the crowd of the Stones and the Beatles and all those guys. And he was better at 78 than he was at 18. And that's kind of an amazing thing. But just a really next level player. And he was a big partner with Rod Stewart and et cetera, et cetera. But like in the last 40 years of his career, 50, whatever, he was an instrumental guitar player, jazz fusion. Like it was pretty heavy, heady stuff. And not normally a space that has a lot of women in it. And Beck hired, Tal Wilkenfeld and several other people. He hired female musicians, and I think he gave a lot of credibility to women in that space of being serious, heavy-duty players. Mm-hmm. And I'm not at all suggesting that he did it himself or whatever. I just think he contributed, and it was kind of like, career-wise, that was one of his contributions. The players he was hiring were there because they were hardcore players. Even to the point that, not that I know Tal, in her like social media post about Jeff Beck, she mentioned, and this is even problematic in a way, she mentioned that like he was so mentoring to her that it even was wrongly put on Wikipedia that she was his daughter.
Wow.
Which the problematic thing being like, oh, he's got this girl playing with him, she must be his daughter or something. Yeah. You know, that's the downside. If you're going to watch anything, go watch Live at Ronnie Scott's if you haven't heard anything. It's on YouTube. And they do Because We Ended as Lovers, which is a tune that Stevie Wonder wrote for Jeff Beck to play. It's maybe his signature thing. And he gives the bass player like more solo than he gets. And then they get done and he's like, Look at her. She's so great. And you go like, that's your signature tune, man. And you're like, Hall of Fame.
Pretty classy.
Pretty amazingly classy. But like, it was so cool that an older generation guy did give all these people a leg up and wasn't doing it on purpose. It wasn't a gimmick. It's just this really cool part of his legacy that I think is really gonna resonate forever. I've also been obsessed with Les Paul, which is a model of guitar, but it's a model of guitar because of the actual dude Les Paul. He was one of the main early proponents of the solid body electric guitar. So acoustic guitars are, of course, hollow body, and that's how they make noise. And the original thing was jazz guitars and stuff were hollow body. They just stuck a pickup on it. But Les figured out in the 40s, mid-40s, early 40s, that you were losing so much vibration because the guitar was this box, sort of like a drum. You hit the string, and all the vibration goes into the resonance of the guitar, and you don't get sustain. You get volume, but you lose your sustain, which everybody knows if you hit a note on an acoustic guitar, it doesn't sustain anything like an electric guitar. Les Paul figured out if you made the body solid and you have an electronic pickup, you no longer care that guitar has any volume because it's going to be coming out of an amplifier. So you can get sustain out of a guitar if you have a solid body guitar.
Interesting.
And he made the first prototypes called the Log, where he just got like a literal 4x4, like I think it was like some sort of like small railroad spike thing, and just
railroad tie.
Yeah, bolted a guitar neck to it and bolted a pickup to it and could play. And people were like blown away. Like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. And that's just one of the things about the guy. And that's why Les Pauls are called Les Pauls. That model of guitar did a lot of rock and roll. He also basically invented and pioneered multi-track recording.
Mm-hmm. And what you were telling me was pretty
cool. It's insane. He started there's a track from 1948, Les Paul, I think it's called Lover. Pretty sure it's called Lover. And you should absolutely check it out. It's ridiculous even now, but for being 1948, it is just like out of this world. And what Les Paul figured out to do was sort of, and you know, Wes and I used to do this when we were like 12 and 13, where we would get two boom boxes. And you'd play guitars into one boom box, and then you'd play that back, and then have another boombox record, and then you would play over the rhythm guitar, and then you could record yourself doing solos over rhythm guitar, which is what Les Paul was doing in 1948, except he was doing it with acetate discs, because they hadn't even really popularized magnetic tape yet. So what he was doing was playing something onto a disc, and it was getting like carved into that disc in real time, and then he would put that on a player, and he would play along with the first part, and then he would have two parts down, and then he would play it the other way. And
you mean he would play the 2-part
thing, and then play the third part along with the 2 parts,
and so on,
and so on.
Yeah.
And he was talking about in one of the things I read that like because it was just burning straight to acetate disc, there's no, not even burning. It was like carving into. If you messed up a take, you lost all the takes.
Yeah.
So let's say you get 11 parts down, and part number 12 you mess up, that's all gone. You're starting back from the beginning.
That's so crazy.
And it took him over 1,000 discs to make that song.
Oh my gosh.
He used up over 1,000 discs finally making that. It's out of this world that it was made that long ago.
And knowing how it was made, that's going to make it even more interesting to listen to.
Oh, it's just, it doesn't even seem real. But he also figured out almost like whammy pedal stuff and like octave shifted guitars, because he would play something back at half speed and then play the part. And then when he played it back at full speed, it would be an octave higher. So it just sounds like for 1948, you can't even... That was not even common practice for another 20 years after that. It was possible, but it wasn't super common practice for another 20 years after that. And then he was the first person to then start doing that with tape machines. And then he went to a guy at Ampex, the tape machine company, and I'm not a historian or anything, but basically was like, hey dudes, can you put me a second play and record head on one of these machines? And he basically got them to like drill holes in the side of the thing and just put another play record assembly on there so that he could actually do tracks. Just an amazing amount of innovation along the way. He invented phasing, he invented delay, which is echo. He invented all these things, and it was just, I've been so obsessed with the guy the past week or so. It's just an amazing amount of innovation to come out of one guy. Mm-hmm. And then he wound up living to be 90 years old, and he had a weekly gig that he played in New York City.
Oh my gosh.
When he was like 90, and just like Monday, you could go see Les Paul play jazz at... until cool. I think he died in 2009 or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Go check out Les Paul Lover.
Well, I'll see if do you know if it's available online somewhere?
Oh, yeah, it's on YouTube. It's everywhere.
I'll try to find a link to it.
And there are some videos, if you Google it, where they kind of demonstrate the process. And there's some cool stuff. His wife, Mary Ford, was the singer, and he would do the whole band on multi-track tape machines, and then she would sing, and she was the first person to do her own harmonies. Like the first person in history to do her own harmonies, because Les Paul had figured out the technology. So she would layer up like 20 of her voices, and literally no one had ever done that before, because no one could do that before. Anyway, but there's some TV appearances where he's actually demonstrating the tape technology of like playing over stuff, and it sort of works a little bit like a modern looper pedal.
Yeah.
Where you put in a loop like we do with the Duo.
Yeah. Maybe he's our sponsor.
Maybe he's our sponsor.
Well, I don't think we could say this podcast is sponsored by Les Paul.
We probably could not. I don't feel great about that.
We might get in trouble, and it doesn't feel right.
Let's see, who's the sponsor? Obviously, Performance High. This podcast is sponsored by the concept of Asian food. Asian food.
The concept of poke bowls.
Poke bowls. Yeah. Also, how funny was it? We went and saw Tyler Howell. He's a country artist that you're working with and I'm going to work with. And he has a saxophone player.
Yeah.
And then they tore into a sax solo. He was just kind of filling for most of the night. And then he actually had like a big solo feature thing. And people just erupted. And we were like...
That was as soon as he started playing, right? Not like after he played. It wasn't
not
like
after.
It wasn't like yay for the solo. It was yay the concept of horns.
The concept of horns, and we just looked at each other. and We were like, the concept of horns. I also want to thank the Chipotle behind Nissi's. I found out from Nate Marsh. He sent us a lovely text. Friend of the pod, Nate Marsh.
Yeah.
He ate there recently and was happy that he made it there. So apparently. That relationship has been repaired.
I think we are sponsors of Chipotle. We're bringing them
That
clients.
may be more true. That may be more true. The waters have gotten so muddled. It's really unclear what's happening anymore. But anyway, Chipotle by Nissi's, Performance High.
Yeah, and the concept of poke bowls.
Concept of poke bowls. What is a poke bowl?
I'm not sure I could tell you like a definition of it, but it's usually a bowl that has rice on the bottom and it's got a collection of vegetables and stuff, like maybe some spring greens, and it can be I had tuna, but they also had options for salmon and tofu and shrimp.
Oh,
I've usually seen it be tuna, but I got tuna. Yeah, tuna poke bowl. But yeah, it's just like it's not cooked tuna. It's like sushi grade raw tuna.
Right. Thank you guys so much. Hi to everyone that came out to the show.
And thanks for listening. We appreciate you.
We'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye.